The morning started like any other Tuesday at Jefferson High School. Students filled the hallways, locker doors slammed shut, and the usual buzz of teenage chatter echoed through the corridors. But today was different. Today was the spring talent show assembly, and everyone seemed a little more excited than usual. 12-year-old Keisha sat in her seat near the middle of the auditorium, trying to make herself as small as possible. She'd been at Jefferson High for only 3 months now, ever since her family moved from the city to this quiet suburban neighborhood. Making friends hadn't been easy. Most kids already had their groups, their inside jokes, their lunch table spots claimed years ago. Keisha was still figuring out where she fit in. The auditorium lights dimmed slightly as Principal Henderson walked onto the stage. He was a tall man in his late 50s with graying hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He'd been principal at Jefferson for almost 15 years and everyone knew him. Some students liked him. Others didn't. Keisha hadn't really formed an opinion yet, though something about the way he looked past her in the hallways made her feel invisible. "Good morning, Jefferson High." Principal Henderson's voice boomed through the microphone. A few students cheered half-heartedly. "Welcome to our annual Spring Talent Show. We've got some amazing performances lined up for you today." Keisha watched as the first act took the stage. 2 girls from the drama club performed a comedy sketch that got a few laughs. Then came a boy who did magic tricks, though everyone could clearly see how most of them worked. A group of seniors sang a pop song, slightly off-key but enthusiastic. The audience clapped politely after each performance. Around the 4th act, Principal Henderson returned to the microphone with an announcement. "Well, folks, we've hit a little snag. Our next performer, who was supposed to play guitar, isn't here today. Seems like he's out sick." A collective groan rose from the audience. The talent show was supposed to run for exactly 1 hour during 3rd period, and they still had 20 minutes to fill. Principal Henderson scanned the crowd, shielding his eyes from the stage lights with his hand. Teachers sat along the sides of the auditorium, some grading papers, others watching the show with mild interest. Students whispered to each other, checking their phones when they thought no one was looking. Then Principal Henderson's eyes stopped moving. They'd landed on something, or rather someone. Keisha felt a strange sensation, like when you know someone is staring at you even before you look up. She glanced toward the stage and realized with a sinking feeling that he was looking directly at her. "You there," he said, pointing. "Young lady in the blue sweater." Keisha's heart dropped. She was wearing a blue sweater. Several students around her turned to look, creating a ripple effect through the rows. Her face grew hot. "Yes, you. What's your name?" Principal Henderson asked, his voice carrying that tone adults use when they think they're being friendly but really aren't. Keisha wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Keisha, speak up, honey. Nobody can hear you," he said. A few students giggled. "Keisha," she repeated, louder this time. "Keisha." "Well, Keisha, why don't you come up here and help us out?" He gestured grandly toward the stage like a game show host revealing a prize. Keisha felt frozen in her seat. Why was he calling on her? She hadn't raised her hand. She hadn't volunteered for anything. Around her, students were whispering and stealing glances in her direction. "Come on now, don't be shy," Principal Henderson urged, his smile growing wider. Something about that smile made Keisha's stomach twist. She looked around desperately, hoping he'd change his mind or call on someone else. But every face in the auditorium was now turned toward her, waiting. Slowly, on shaking legs, she stood up. The walk down the aisle felt like it took forever. Each step echoed in her ears louder than it actually was. She could feel hundreds of eyes following her movement. When she finally reached the stage steps, Principal Henderson extended his hand as if to help her up, but she climbed the stairs on her own. The stage lights were brighter than she'd expected, hot and blinding. She couldn't see the audience anymore, just dark shapes and the occasional glow of a phone screen. "So, Keisha," Principal Henderson said, standing beside her with the microphone, "do you have any talents you'd like to share with us today?" It was the way he said it that made everything clear. The slight emphasis on the word any, the pause before talents, the way he glanced at some of the teachers with that same smile. He didn't expect her to have any talents. He'd called her up here as a joke, as filler, as entertainment of a different sort. Keisha's eyes drifted across the stage and landed on the grand piano sitting there. It was a beautiful instrument, a black Steinway that gleamed under the lights. She knew it had been donated by the parents of some wealthy student. She'd walked past it in the hallway near the music room dozens of times, always wanting to touch it but never daring to. "Well?" Principal Henderson prompted. "Cat got your tongue?" More giggles from the audience. Keisha saw a few teachers shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Mrs. Patterson, her English teacher, looked worried. But nobody said anything. Nobody stopped what was happening. Principal Henderson followed her gaze to the piano. His smile grew even wider, and there was something mean in it now, something that reminded Keisha of the kids who used to exclude her at lunch. "Oh, you play piano, do you?" His tone made it clear he didn't believe it for a second. Keisha didn't answer. Her throat felt tight and she was afraid if she tried to speak her voice would crack. "Tell you what," Principal Henderson said, walking over to the piano and patting it like it was a prized possession. "Why don't you sit down here and play something for us? I'm sure everyone would love to hear what you can do." The auditorium fell into an awkward silence. Keisha could hear it clearly now, the mockery underneath his words. He was daring her, testing her, expecting her to either run off the stage in tears or sit down and prove she couldn't play. Several students pulled out their phones, sensing that something interesting was about to happen. Though they weren't sure what yet, some looked excited. Others looked uncomfortable. A few looked sorry for her. Keisha stood there for what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few seconds. Her hands were trembling. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone in the auditorium must be able to hear it. Part of her wanted to run. Part of her wanted to tell him exactly what she thought of his cruel little game. But another part of her, a stronger part, felt something else entirely. Anger, not the hot, explosive kind, but the cold, focused kind that sharpens your mind instead of clouding it. She looked at the piano, then at Principal Henderson with his smug expression, then back at the piano. Without saying a word, Keisha walked over to the piano bench. Her legs felt steadier now, powered by something deeper than fear. She sat down slowly, adjusting the bench slightly closer to the keys. The audience watched in silence, unsure what they were about to witness. Principal Henderson stood off to the side, arms crossed, that same mocking smile on his face. He was waiting for her to fail, expecting it, looking forward to it even. Keisha placed her hands over the keys, her fingers hovering just above the smooth ivory and ebony. She could feel the weight of every eye in that auditorium. She could sense the judgment, the doubt, the low expectations, and then very slowly, she took a deep breath and let her fingers fall to the keys. The first note rang out across the auditorium, clear and pure. Then came the second and the third. Within moments, the opening melody of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata filled every corner of the room. The effect was immediate. Students who had been whispering fell silent. Teachers who had been looking at their papers glanced up sharply. Principal Henderson's smile faltered just slightly as he realized something unexpected was happening. Keisha's fingers moved across the keys with a grace that seemed to contradict her nervous entrance just moments before. Her eyes were closed now, her whole body swaying gently with the music. The hesitant, frightened girl from 2 minutes ago had disappeared, replaced by someone completely absorbed in what she was doing. The Moonlight Sonata is not an easy piece. It requires control, emotion, and years of practice to play well. Keisha played it beautifully. Each note flowed into the next like water, soft and haunting. The melody had a sadness to it, but also a strength. Some students later said they got chills listening to it. Others said they'd never really understood what classical music was about until that moment. In the third row, a girl named Ashley leaned over to her friend. "Is this really happening?" she whispered. Her friend just shook her head in amazement, unable to look away from the stage. Principal Henderson's arms slowly uncrossed. The smug expression was gone now, replaced by something harder to read. Confusion, maybe, or embarrassment. He glanced toward some of the teachers, but they weren't looking at him. Everyone's eyes were locked on Keisha. The piece built slowly, gaining intensity. Keisha's hands moved faster now, reaching across the keyboard with confidence. Her foot worked the pedals beneath the piano, adding depth to the sound. She played like someone who had spent countless hours at a piano bench. Someone who knew this instrument as well as she knew her own heartbeat. Mrs. Patterson, the English teacher, felt tears pricking at her eyes. She'd seen Keisha in her class every day for 3 months, watching this quiet girl sit in the back row, rarely speaking up, always seeming a little lost. She'd had no idea this talent existed inside her. The Moonlight Sonata moved toward its conclusion, the notes growing softer, more delicate. Keisha played the final measures with such tenderness that several people in the audience found themselves holding their breath. Then came the last note, hanging in the air like a question that had finally been answered, but Keisha didn't stop. Her hands remained on the keys, and after just a brief pause, she began playing something completely different. The opening chords of a modern song filled the auditorium, and several students immediately recognized it. It was a popular ballad, something they'd all heard on the radio 100 times, but hearing it played on piano, live right in front of them, made it sound brand new. Keisha's interpretation added runs and flourishes that weren't in the original version. She mixed classical techniques with contemporary style, making something that belonged entirely to her. Her fingers danced across the keys now, faster and more playful than before. She was showing off a little, and she knew it. But after what had just happened, after being called up here as a joke, she'd earned the right. Some students started recording on their phones. Others just watched, mouths hanging open. In the back row, a group of boys who usually didn't pay attention to anything during assemblies sat forward in their seats, completely captivated. The song built to its chorus, and Keisha's whole body moved with the music. She leaned into the dramatic moments and pulled back during the quieter parts. Every note was intentional, every flourish purposeful. She was telling a story with her hands, and everyone in that auditorium understood it perfectly. Principal Henderson stood frozen at the edge of the stage. His face had gone from pale to slightly red. A few teachers were now looking at him, their expressions ranging from surprise to something that looked a lot like anger. What he'd meant as a humiliating moment had backfired spectacularly, and everyone in the room knew it. The music swelled toward its climax. Keisha's fingers flew across the keys in a series of complex runs that most professional pianists would struggle with. Then she brought it all down to a gentle, emotional ending that somehow felt even more powerful than the loud parts. The final chord resonated through the auditorium, vibrating in everyone's chest. For a moment, there was complete silence. Keisha lifted her hands from the keys and opened her eyes, suddenly remembering where she was. Her heart was still racing, but now it was from the thrill of playing rather than fear. She turned slightly to look at the audience, and reality came crashing back. Then the auditorium exploded. Students leaped to their feet, cheering and clapping. The sound was deafening. Some kids were shouting, others were whistling. A few were wiping tears from their eyes. The applause went on, wave after wave of it, louder than anything that had happened during the talent show so far. Mrs. Patterson was on her feet, clapping so hard her hands hurt. Mr. Chen, the math teacher, was shaking his head in disbelief, a huge smile on his face. Even the students who usually acted too cool to care about anything were standing up, genuinely impressed. Keisha sat on the piano bench, completely overwhelmed. She hadn't expected this. She just wanted to play, to prove that she wasn't nothing, that she wasn't someone who could be made fun of and dismissed. She hadn't thought about what would happen after. "That was incredible," someone shouted from the crowd. Others echoed the sentiment. The applause continued, showing no signs of stopping. Keisha slowly stood up from the bench, her legs feeling shaky again, but for a completely different reason now. She walked toward the stage steps, and students in the front row reached out like they wanted to high-five her or shake her hand. Several were already posting the videos they'd recorded to social media. Within minutes, those videos would start spreading beyond the walls of Jefferson High. Principal Henderson finally seemed to snap out of whatever daze he was in. He walked over to the microphone, trying to regain control of the situation. "Well, that was certainly unexpected," he said, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. "Let's give another round of applause for Keisha." But his words felt hollow now. Everyone knew what he'd tried to do. Everyone had seen his face when Keisha first sat down at that piano, the way he'd expected her to fail. And everyone had just witnessed her prove him spectacularly wrong. Keisha made her way back down the aisle toward her seat. Students she'd never spoken to before were smiling at her, some reaching out to pat her shoulder as she passed. A girl named Rochelle, who sat 2 rows ahead in her history class, gave her a huge grin and a thumbs up. When Keisha finally reached her seat and sat down, her hands were trembling. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, and she was beginning to realize what had just happened. She'd played in front of the entire school. She'd taken the worst moment of her time at Jefferson High and somehow turned it into something else entirely. Ashley, The girl sitting nearby leaned over. "That was amazing," she whispered. "How long have you been playing?" Before Keisha could answer, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Then it buzzed again, and again. She pulled it out and saw notification after notification lighting up her screen. Messages from classmates, tags on social media. People she barely knew were commenting on videos of her performance that were already circulating online. The talent show continued with a few more acts, but nobody was really paying attention anymore. Students kept glancing back at Keisha, whispering to their friends, rewatching the videos on their phones. What had started as a cruel joke by Principal Henderson had become the most talked about moment in Jefferson High's recent history, and it was only just beginning. By lunchtime, the videos had spread beyond Jefferson High. Students from neighboring schools were sharing them. Parents were texting each other. Local community groups were posting about it. The hashtag that someone created, Piano Girl, was trending in their city. Keisha sat in the cafeteria with a tray of food she couldn't eat. Her stomach was still doing flips. For the first time since she'd arrived at Jefferson, people were coming up to her table, not to tease or ignore her, but to talk, to compliment her, to ask questions. "Where did you learn to play like that?" a boy named Trevor asked, sliding into the seat across from her. He was on the basketball team, one of the popular kids who'd never so much as looked her way before. Keisha picked at her sandwich. "I've been taking lessons since I was 4, she said quietly. "My mom found a teacher in our old neighborhood who was really good." 4 years old. "That's wild," Trevor said, shaking his head. "You should have told someone you could play like that." The music teacher would have freaked out. That was the thing, though. Keisha had tried. On her second week at Jefferson, she'd gone to the music room and asked Mr. Willis, the band director, if she could maybe help out with something, anything, music-related. He'd barely looked up from his sheet music. "We're pretty full up right now," he'd said. "Maybe try again next semester." She hadn't tried again. Rochelle, who had given her the thumbs up during the assembly, sat down next to her. "Girl, you know you're famous now, right? My cousin who goes to Westfield just sent me one of the videos. It's got like 5,000 views already." Keisha's eyes widened. 5,000? "And climbing," Rochelle said, showing her phone screen. The video was posted by someone named DJ Tyler 22, a student Keisha recognized but had never spoken to. The caption read, "Principal tried to embarrass new girl. She destroyed the piano instead." "This is insane." The comments were flooding in. Most of them were positive, praising Keisha's talent, but some were asking different questions. Why had the principal called her up in the first place? Why had he looked so smug at the beginning? Several people were pointing out that his behavior seemed off, maybe even inappropriate. "My mom already called the school," Rochelle said. "She saw the video and got mad about how Henderson put you on the spot like that." "I think other parents are calling too." Keisha felt her chest tighten. She hadn't wanted this to become a big thing. She'd just wanted to show that she wasn't someone who could be pushed around. Now it was spiraling into something she couldn't control. The rest of the school day passed in a blur. Teachers who normally wouldn't have noticed her stopped her in the hallway to say how impressed they were. Mrs. Patterson pulled her aside after English class and apologized. "I should have said something when he called you up there," she said, her voice full of regret. "I could see what he was doing, and I just sat there. I'm sorry, Keisha." When the final bell rang, Keisha grabbed her backpack and headed for the front entrance. Her mom was supposed to pick her up today since the bus route from their new house was still being figured out. As she pushed through the front doors, she spotted her mother's car already in the pickup line. One look at her mom's face told Keisha that she'd already heard. Diana Turner got out of the car, leaving the engine running, and walked toward her daughter. She was still wearing her scrubs from her shift at the hospital. Her expression was a complicated mix of pride and anger. "Get in the car, baby," Diana said softly. "We need to talk." They drove home in silence at first. Then Diana spoke, her voice carefully controlled. "I got a call from the school about 2 hours ago. Vice Principal Rogers called to tell me about what happened at the assembly. Then I saw the videos that parents have been sharing. Mom, I can explain." "You don't need to explain anything," Diana interrupted gently. "You didn't do anything wrong." "But that principal? Principal Henderson? What he did was wrong, Keisha. Very wrong." Keisha stared out the window, watching the familiar streets pass by. "He didn't think I could play. He was making fun of me." "I know, baby. I know." Diana's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. and I'm going to make sure the school knows that's not okay. You're 12 years old. You're new to that school. For him to single you out like that, to put you on the spot in front of everyone." She trailed off, too angry to finish. They pulled into the driveway of their small house. Inside, Diana made them both tea, something she always did when they needed to have a serious conversation. They sat at the kitchen table and Keisha told her mom everything. How isolated she'd felt at the new school. How she'd tried to get involved with music but felt shut out. How Principal Henderson had looked at her with that cruel smile, expecting her to fail. "I'm proud of you," Diana said when Keisha finished. "I'm proud that you sat down at that piano and showed them what you're made of. But I'm also worried. This is getting big, Keisha. People are talking about it online. News outlets are starting to pick it up." As if on cue, Diana's phone rang. She looked at the screen and frowned. "It's a reporter from Channel 7. That's the third one today." She declined the call. Over the next 24 hours, the story exploded beyond anything either of them could have imagined. The original video now had over 100,000 views. News websites were writing articles with headlines like, "Students' Hidden Talent Exposed After Principals," "Cruel Challenge," and "Piano. Performance Goes Viral After School Assembly." Incident. The school board announced they were launching an investigation into the incident. Parents were demanding answers. Some were calling for Principal Henderson to be disciplined. Others were sharing their own stories about times they felt their children had been treated unfairly at Jefferson High. Keisha's phone kept buzzing with messages. Some were from classmates she barely knew, congratulating her. Others were from strangers who had somehow gotten her number, asking for interviews or wanting to book her for events. Diana had to change Keisha's privacy settings and block unknown numbers. On Wednesday morning, Diana kept Keisha home from school. "Just for today," she said. "Things are too crazy right now. The school needs to figure out how to handle this properly." They spent the morning fielding calls and messages. A local music school called, saying they'd seen the video and wanted to offer Keisha a scholarship. A talent agent from the city sent an email asking if they'd be interested in representation. A community center invited her to perform at their upcoming benefit concert. The most surprising call came around noon. It was from Dr. Chen, the director of the State Youth Symphony. "I don't usually reach out like this," he said over speakerphone. "But after seeing that video, I had to call. That level of skill at 12 years old is extraordinary. We'd love to have Keisha audition for our program." Diana looked at her daughter, whose eyes had gone wide. The State Youth Symphony was prestigious, competitive, and exactly the kind of opportunity Keisha had dreamed about but never thought was possible for her. "We'd be honored," Diana told him. By Thursday, the investigation was in full swing. Students were being interviewed. Teachers were being questioned. A pattern was starting to emerge. Principal Henderson had a history of treating certain students differently, of having lower expectations for them, of making comments that walked the line of inappropriate. Mrs. Patterson came forward and admitted she should have reported previous incidents. Mr. Chen shared that he'd witnessed Henderson discourage a student from taking advanced classes, saying they probably weren't ready for that level of work without even looking at their grades. The school board held an emergency meeting. Parents packed the room, many of them holding printed screenshots of the viral video. They demanded accountability. They demanded change. They demanded that their children be treated with respect, regardless of who they were or where they came from. Keisha and her mother attended the meeting, sitting in the back row. Diana held her daughter's hand as parent after parent stood up to speak. Some shared their own experiences. Others talked about the systemic issues at the school. One father, a lawyer, pointed out that what had happened could be considered a form of discrimination, and that the district could face legal consequences if they didn't take appropriate action. Through it all, Principal Henderson sat at a table facing the audience, his face blank. He'd released a statement earlier that week saying the incident had been misunderstood and that he'd only meant to encourage student participation. But nobody was buying it. The video made his intentions clear. At the end of the meeting, the school board president stood up. "We've heard your concerns," she said, "and we're taking them seriously. Principal Henderson has been placed on administrative leave pending the completion of our investigation. In the meantime, Vice Principal Rogers will be acting as interim principal." The room erupted in a mixture of applause and continued demands for more action. Keisha felt her mother squeeze her hand. This was really happening. One moment at a piano had sparked something much bigger than either of them had anticipated. As they left the building that night, a reporter approached them in the parking lot. "Mrs. Turner, how does it feel knowing your daughter's courage has sparked real change at this school?" Diana looked down at Keisha, then back at the reporter. "My daughter shouldn't have needed courage just to survive a school assembly. But I'm proud of how she handled herself, and I hope this means no other child will have to go through what she did." 3 weeks had passed since the assembly, and Jefferson High felt like a different place. Keisha walked through the hallways now without that tight feeling in her chest, without constantly watching the floor to avoid eye contact. Students smiled at her. Teachers knew her name. She wasn't invisible anymore, but the biggest changes were happening beyond just her personal experience. The school board's investigation had concluded the previous Friday, and the results were made public on Monday morning. Principal Henderson was being let go. The report cited multiple instances of inappropriate behavior, biased treatment of students, and a failure to create an inclusive environment. Several staff members had come forward during the investigation with stories they'd kept quiet for years. Vice Principal Rogers, a woman named Patricia who had been at Jefferson for 5 years, was named the permanent principal. Her first act was to hold an all-school assembly. This time it felt different from the moment everything had started. "I know the past few weeks have been difficult," Principal Rogers said, standing on the same stage where Keisha had played the piano. "But they've also shown us something important. They've shown us that we need to do better, that we can do better, and that starts today." She announced a series of changes: mandatory training for all staff on cultural awareness and unconscious bias, a new student advisory committee that would give kids a real voice in school decisions, an expansion of the music and arts programs with specific outreach to students who might not have thought those opportunities were for them, a partnership with local community organizations to provide scholarships and support for students pursuing creative fields. Keisha sat in the audience listening. Rochelle sat beside her, and they'd become genuine friends over the past weeks. "This is because of you, you know," Rochelle whispered. "None of this would be happening if you hadn't sat down at that piano." Keisha wasn't sure how she felt about that. She hadn't meant to start a revolution. She just wanted to prove she wasn't nothing, but somehow that one moment had cracked something open, and now light was pouring through. After the assembly, Mr. Willis, the band director who had dismissed her weeks ago, approached her in the hallway. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Keisha, I owe you an apology," he said. "When you came to me asking about music opportunities, I should have listened. I should have given you a chance." "I'm sorry," Keisha nodded slowly. The apology felt genuine, even if it came too late to change what had happened. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'd like to make it right," Mr. Willis continued. "I'm starting a new piano ensemble program, and I'd love for you to be part of it. Maybe even help me teach some of the younger students who are interested in learning." For the first time in weeks, Keisha felt a genuine smile spread across her face. "I'd like that," she said. The opportunities kept coming. The audition for the State Youth Symphony had gone better than Keisha could have imagined. Dr. Chen had asked her to play whatever she wanted, and she'd chosen a piece by a contemporary black composer named Florence Price, someone her old teacher had introduced her to years ago. Dr. Chen had listened with his eyes closed, nodding along to the music. When she finished, he'd simply said, "Welcome to the symphony." Her first rehearsal was on a Saturday morning at the city's Performing Arts Center. Diana drove her there early, both of them nervous and excited. The building was impressive, all glass and modern architecture. Inside, the rehearsal hall had perfect acoustics and rows of music stands already set up. The other young musicians started arriving. Keisha noticed she was one of only 3 black students in a group of about 40. It reminded her of why representation mattered, why what had happened at Jefferson was about more than just one mean principal. It was about who got to see themselves in these spaces, who felt welcome, who got encouraged to pursue their talents. During a break in rehearsal, a girl named Priya who played violin came over to introduce herself. "I saw your video," she said. "What you did was brave. My little sister wants to start piano lessons now because of you. She said if you can do it, maybe she can too." Stories like that kept finding their way to Keisha. Parents would stop Diana at the grocery store to say their daughter had started taking music more seriously. Teachers from other schools sent messages saying they were rethinking how they called on students in class. A community center in a neighboring town started a scholarship fund inspired by Keisha's story, specifically for students from underrepresented backgrounds who wanted to study classical music. The benefit concert that the community center had invited her to perform at was scheduled for a Friday evening in late April. The event was raising money for youth arts programs, and tickets had sold out within days of announcing that Keisha would be performing. Diana had been worried about the pressure, about whether this was too much too fast for a 12-year-old. But Keisha felt ready, more than ready. The night of the concert, Keisha stood backstage in a simple black dress Diana had bought for the occasion. She could hear the crowd gathering in the auditorium, the murmur of hundreds of voices. Her hands were shaking a little, but it was excitement now rather than fear. A woman named Lorraine, who ran the community center, came backstage to check on her. "There are some news crews out there," she said gently. "And the mayor is here. A few local celebrities too. But don't let that throw you off. You just play like you did in that video. Play from your heart." When Keisha walked onto the stage, the applause was immediate and warm. The audience was diverse. People of all ages and backgrounds who had come to support the cause, and to see the girl whose piano playing had sparked a conversation about equity and opportunity in their city. She sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and took a moment to center herself. Then she began to play. She'd chosen a program that mixed classical pieces with more contemporary songs, showing the range of what she could do. She played Chopin and Alicia Keys. She played Bach and John Legend. Each piece flowed into the next, telling a story about where classical music had been and where it was going. During one piece, a jazzy arrangement of a classic standard, she caught Diana's eye in the front row. Her mother was crying but smiling too, so proud it radiated off her. Next to Diana sat Mrs. Patterson and several other teachers from Jefferson, all dressed up for the occasion. Even Principal Rogers had come, sitting near the back, nodding along to the music. The final piece Keisha had chosen was special. It was an original composition, something she'd been working on for the past 2 weeks with help from Dr. Chen. She'd titled it Unexpected Voices, and it incorporated themes from all the different styles she loved. It started soft and hesitant, like she'd felt walking down that aisle at the talent show. Then it grew stronger, more confident, building to a powerful climax before settling into a gentle, hopeful ending. When the last note faded, there was a beat of silence. Then the entire auditorium rose to its feet. The standing ovation went on for minutes. People were cheering, crying, celebrating not just the music but everything it represented. Backstage afterward, Keisha was surrounded by well-wishers. The mayor congratulated her and mentioned something about a community arts initiative she was planning. A producer from a local radio station asked if she'd be interested in recording some pieces for broadcast. A representative from a national youth talent organization wanted to feature her story in their magazine. But the moment that meant the most came when a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, shyly approached with her mother. The girl was clutching a small toy piano. "Are you the piano girl?" she asked in a tiny voice. Keisha knelt down to the girl's level. "I play piano, yes, do you?" The little girl nodded enthusiastically. "I just started. My mommy says I can be good like you if I practice. She says it doesn't matter what anyone thinks, I can do anything." The girl's mother, tears in her eyes, mouthed, "Thank you," over her daughter's head. Keisha felt something shift inside her chest. This was bigger than viral videos or news coverage or even the changes at Jefferson High. This was about a little girl who now believed she could do anything. This was about doors opening that had been closed. This was about voices being heard that had been silenced. On the drive home that night, Diana reached over and squeezed Keisha's hand. "I know the last month has been overwhelming," she said, "but I want you to remember something. What happened at that assembly wasn't about the principal being mean, even though he was. It was about you being brave enough to show who you really are, and that changed everything." Keisha looked out the window at the city lights passing by. A month ago, she'd been invisible, lonely, convinced she'd never find her place at Jefferson High. Now she was helping to reshape what that place could be, not just for herself but for everyone who came after her. "Mom," Keisha said softly. "Yeah, baby? I think I want to keep doing this. Not just performing but helping other kids find their voices too. Teaching, advocating, making sure what happened to me leads to something good." Diana smiled, her eyes shining with pride. Then that's exactly what we'll do. The car pulled into their driveway. Inside, tomorrow's homework was waiting. Regular life was waiting. But nothing was quite as regular anymore. Keisha had learned that sometimes the worst moments can crack open into the best opportunities, and that standing up for yourself can end up meaning standing up for everyone. 1 year later, Keisha stood in front of the bathroom mirror in her house, adjusting the collar of her new dress. Today was the spring talent show at Jefferson High again, exactly 1 year since everything had changed. But this time she wasn't being called up as a joke. This time she was the guest of honor. "You ready, sweetie?" Diana called from downstairs. Keisha took a deep breath and smiled at her reflection. The nervous 12-year-old who'd walked those halls a year ago felt like a different person. She was 13 now, taller, more confident, but still the same girl who just wanted to play piano and be seen for who she really was. The drive to school felt surreal. Diana chatted about how proud she was, how far things had come, but Keisha was lost in her own thoughts. She remembered that awful walk down the auditorium aisle, the cruel smile on Principal Henderson's face, the weight of everyone's eyes on her. She remembered sitting at that piano bench with trembling hands, angry and scared and determined all at once. Jefferson High looked the same from the outside, but everything inside had shifted. The hallways had new artwork from students displayed on the walls. The music room had been renovated and expanded. There was a new scholarship board near the main office, listing opportunities for students interested in arts and music. At the top of the board was a plaque that read, "In honor of student voice and courage." Principal Rogers met them at the entrance with a warm smile. "Keisha, Diana, thank you so much for being here today. The students are so excited." They walked together toward the auditorium. Along the way, Keisha saw familiar faces. Rochelle waved from near her locker. Trevor gave her a fist bump as they passed. Mrs. Patterson poked her head out of her classroom to mouth, "Good luck." The auditorium was already packed when they arrived. Every seat was filled with students, teachers, and even some parents who'd taken time off work to attend. There was an energy in the room, an anticipation that felt electric. This wasn't just another talent show. Everyone knew this day meant something more. Keisha sat in the front row with her mother while the show began. The performances were better than last year. Students seemed more confident, more willing to take risks with their talents. A girl performed a spoken word poem about finding her identity. A group of boys did a step routine that had everyone clapping along. 2 students played a violin duet that was genuinely impressive. Then Principal Rogers took the stage. "Before we continue," she said, "I want to take a moment to talk about why today is special. 1 year ago, something happened in this very auditorium that changed our school. It showed us our flaws, yes, but it also showed us our potential. It reminded us that every student has value, that every voice deserves to be heard, and that talent exists in places we might not expect if we're not really looking." She gestured toward Keisha. "Today, we're honored to have Keisha Turner perform for us again. But she's not just here as a performer. Over the past year, Keisha has become an advocate, a teacher, and an inspiration. She's helped launch our new mentorship program where older students teach piano to younger kids who can't afford lessons. She's spoken at school board meetings about equity in arts education, and she's shown all of us what courage really looks like." The applause was immediate and genuine. Keisha felt her cheeks warm as she stood up. This time, walking to the stage felt completely different. She wasn't alone or scared. She was surrounded by support, by people who actually saw her. When she reached the piano, she turned to face the audience before sitting down. "Thank you," she said into the microphone that had been set up. Her voice was steady now. "A year ago, I sat at this piano feeling like I had something to prove. Today, I'm sitting here because I want to share something with all of you." She sat at the bench and positioned her hands over the keys. "This piece is called Finding Home. I wrote it about what this past year has taught me, about how the scariest moments can lead to the most beautiful changes, about how speaking up even when your voice shakes matters, and about how home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's finding people who see you for who you really are." The piece began softly, with gentle notes that spoke of uncertainty and searching. Keisha had poured everything she'd learned into this composition. The lonely early days at Jefferson, the fear of that first assembly, the anger at being dismissed and underestimated. But then the music shifted, growing stronger and more complex. It captured the feeling of standing up for herself, of discovering that her voice mattered, of watching walls come down and doors open. There were moments in the piece that sounded like conversations, different melodies weaving together like different voices learning to harmonize. There were sections that felt like celebration and others that felt like reflection. The music told a complete story without needing any words. Students sat transfixed. Some had their eyes closed, just listening. Others watched Keisha's hands move across the keys with obvious admiration. Teachers dabbed at their eyes. Even Principal Rogers, standing at the side of the stage, looked moved by what she was hearing. The composition built to a powerful climax that expressed hope and determination, then settled into a peaceful resolution. The final notes hung in the air like a promise of better things to come. When Keisha lifted her hands from the keys, there was a moment of profound silence. Then the auditorium erupted. But this standing ovation felt different from the one a year ago. That first one had been about shock and surprise, about expectations being shattered. This one was about recognition and celebration, about a community coming together to acknowledge how far they'd come. Keisha stood and took a small bow. As the applause continued, she looked out at the sea of faces. There were students who looked like her, students who didn't, students from all different backgrounds united in this moment, and scattered throughout the crowd, she spotted younger kids watching with wide eyes, seeing someone who looked like them on that stage, believing that maybe they could stand there too someday. After her performance, Keisha didn't immediately return to her seat. Instead, she walked to the side of the stage where 5 younger students were waiting. These were kids from the mentorship program she'd helped create, students who were learning piano for the first time. They ranged from 4th graders to 6th graders, and they all looked nervous and excited. "Are you guys ready?" Keisha asked them quietly. A boy named Christopher nodded enthusiastically. "You'll be right there with us, right?" "The whole time," Keisha promised. Together they walked back to the piano. It was a tight squeeze, getting all 6 of them around the bench and keyboard, but they made it work. Keisha had arranged a simple piece specifically for this moment, something that would let each of the younger students shine while working together as a group. She counted them in, and they began to play. It wasn't perfect. A few notes were missed. The timing wasn't always exact, but it was beautiful in its own way because it was real. It was 5 kids who a year ago wouldn't have had this opportunity, playing piano in front of their whole school because someone had opened a door for them. When they finished, the applause was just as loud as it had been for Keisha's solo performance. The 5 students beamed with pride as they stood up and bowed. Christopher high-fived Keisha before running back to his seat. The rest of the talent show continued with more performances, but everyone knew the most important moment had already happened. When the show ended and students began filing out of the auditorium, many of them stopped by where Keisha was standing to say hello, to thank her, or just to tell her how much her music meant to them. A quiet 8th grader named Destiny approached, clutching a notebook to her chest. "I write songs," she said softly, "but I've been too scared to share them with anyone. After seeing you today, I think maybe I'm ready to try." Keisha smiled. "The world needs to hear your songs," she said. "Don't let fear steal your voice." Later that afternoon, Keisha and Diana walked through the school's new music wing. There were practice rooms now, with pianos and other instruments available for any student to use. On the wall was a framed photo from that first viral video, with a caption beneath it that read, "One moment of courage can change everything. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't played that day?" Diana asked as they stood looking at the photo. Keisha thought about it. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I think I had to play. I couldn't let him be right about me. I couldn't let him make me feel small." "You're anything but small, baby," Diana said, putting her arm around her daughter's shoulders. "You never were." They walked out to the parking lot together. The spring sun was warm on their faces. In her bag, Keisha had sheet music for next month's performance with the Youth Symphony. She had homework to finish. She had piano students to teach on Saturday morning. She had a life that was full and meaningful in hers. As they drove away from Jefferson High, Keisha looked back at the building one more time. A year ago, it had felt like a prison. Now it felt like proof that change was possible, that standing up mattered, that one person really could make a difference. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rochelle. "You killed it today. Piano practice tomorrow?" Keisha smiled and texted back, "Definitely." She leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes, listening to her mother hum along to the radio. Life wasn't perfect. There were still challenges ahead, still moments when she'd have to find her courage again. But she knew now what she was capable of. She knew her voice mattered. She knew that talent didn't need permission to exist, it just needed the bravery to be shared, and that was everything.